Tokyo Xtreme Racer feels like the answer to a question that I've asked for years. Simple, arcade racers that you could pick up and play have, let's face it, become a way of the past. The genre as a whole today is centered around exorbitant budget, massive open-world live service projects. And ever since this trend started to gain traction, I asked myself if we would ever see the fun of simplicity back in this genre. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so happy to say that I have an answer, and it's a brilliant one at that. Tokyo Xtreme Racer quite abruptly came out of nowhere. The Tokyo Xtreme series has been dormant since the PlayStation 2, where it never really was a mainstay household name. This in fact is the main reason why I never got into the series apart from playing 3 for a few hours as context for this review, but that all changes now. After 15 hours of highway brawls, I want to bring my own perspective onto the game that I steadfastly declare what racing games need right now. Welcome to Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I want to start things off with where Tokyo Xtreme Racer separates itself from today's racers, and where I found this most prominent is the approach taken towards how the game plays. Tokyo Xtreme Racer plays like a PS2 game, and I say that in the best way possible. What I find is the key to TXR's success is something that many earlier console or arcade racers, the proper type of arcade racers, perfected, and it all revolves around having a real short and clicky time to race loop. What do I mean by this? Well, think of many of the racing games today, and you've got stupendously large open worlds, menus up the wazoo for collection screens, and superfluous additions which don't really add much to the actual racing. So you'll spend more time in the menus and navigating the world than actually racing. In a game such as TXR, that time to race is short. You're 2 or 3 button presses away from topping into the highway, and from there on, you can rattle off races like they're nothing. All you've got to do is approach a fellow racer from behind, flash your lights, and once you're done, you can keep that loop going, getting multiple races done in as little as 5 minutes. This is precisely what I've been missing for such a long time. And that's not to say that because of the quantity of races that you'll partake in suffers in quality. Far from that. Races in TXR are quite different to anything else in the racing scene, because this isn't about finishing first. Instead, TXR is focused around the concept of will. To put it simply, your opponents will have a pseudo health bar, which will deplete if you make contact, or lead a gap of about 25 meters from them, and will continue to do incrementally more damage the further that you get away. This system may not be anything new, as it's been a TXR hallmark, but that fact doesn't bother me at all, as it's all about implementation and what this brings to the table. Most every race has this beautiful sense of unease. You never know just how much power is going to be in your rival's car, so the possibility of them just smoking you off the bat is very real. You can also be driving like a god, dodging traffic to the closest inch, and then have just one car make a sudden lane change, taking you out of your shot at victory. This all adds up to this brilliant sense of intensity, which will level up tenfold if you shut off your HUD. I highly recommend trying that. Something that adds to the race-to-race gameplay is how the world is set up in Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I mentioned briefly that the game takes place on a highway, and yes, that may sound simple on the surface level. I mean, let's face it, there is only so much you can do with one giant stretch of road that occasionally diverges. But allow me to bring in the other side of this. Because the game is this zoned-in, heavily linear set of road, every single stretch can be perfected. And because there isn't all that much road to drive on, what I noticed is that because I drove on many of the same stretches of freeway over and over again, you start to master them, and not only become faster and faster on that same spot of road that you thought you were familiar with, but you'll learn how to exploit corners and heavily trafficked spots to corner your opponents. So while yes, you aren't given all that much in terms of road, every tiny centimeter of them are so perfectly well utilized and waiting for you to master the long on. What ties this gameplay all together in a perfect little bow is how the campaign is presented to you. I love that without completely unnecessary exposition or characters that you honestly couldn't care less about, I still found myself perfectly invested in the story of the freeway, because you actually have to work to learn more. Let's start from the very beginning so I can show you just how this works. Your introduction is pretty basic. You'll get one of multiple text scenes which will drop in from time to time as you hit certain landmarks in the story. The initial one being very poetic and dramatic, a sign of what's to come as these get progressively more edgy. Once you're through with that, you'll pick up your first car, slowly learn the ropes of the SP system, how to manage factors like your car's tire wear, and get that beautiful rhythm of racing down before heading back to the garage. Funnily enough, it plays quite like a racing version of Persona. You have a day system where you'll choose a point to start from, have the choice of progressing the story through targeting specific rival racers, or just building up yourself and your ride by earning more cash and perk points, in which you can spend to unlock new cars, upgrade parts, skills, perks, or even just sit back and read through some lore on the rivals that you meet. There's much more than just driving aimlessly, searching for opposition on the highway though, you see. One of my favorite parts of the game being the parking lot meetups. I mentioned the diverging pathways before, and on that note, some of these will directly lead you into a meetup populated with plenty of quirky characters to meet. I love that these aren't entirely optional too, as sometimes you'll be searching for a hidden boss somewhere, but before doing so, you would have had to have a conversation with an NPC in order to help pinpoint them, or find someone who can tell you what you'll need in order to face off against certain foes. I want to stick on the characters here for a moment because TXR proves a very important point that many other racing games need to take note of. Take a look at some of these characters that you'll meet throughout the story. Notice how they aren't made up of a polygon budget more expensive than most indie games. They don't have any voice acting at all, and yet still, through inventive dialogue and personable design, they wipe the floor with anything big racing games have conjured up with in the past, I don't know, probably decade. They've got fun little storylines like these football players, a few couples who race together, and the type of diva models with the type of goonballs who buy waifu cups would go crazy over. Speaking of, if you happen to be that type of guy or gal, I ain't judging harshly. I'm happy to announce that I'm partnered with Gamersupps. If you head over to their website, you can choose from their great selection of supplements, which, I'll be honest, I wasn't exactly sold on before giving them a shot. But after trying them out for the past month, they've been my go-to for late nights editing, or helping me focus through my existential crisis playing Metal Gear Solid 2. They're keto, super low calorie, and have the option of caffeine-free flavors if you don't need that extra kick. You can pick up some pretty killer cups too, like the new Pixel Cups, which I'm a huge fan of. Or if your favorite website ends with a 34, you sick they've got a wide selection of waifu cups and merch to suit your tastes. If you use my code UltraViolet, you can get 10% off site-wide, so head on over to that link in the description and give them a whirl. Anyways, getting back on track with the characters of Tokyo Xtreme Racer. I mentioned bosses earlier, and they're very much one of the most fun components of why this game's gameplay loop is so damn fun. They play much like the typical races that you've done to get up to them, but with the difficulty a fair bit more challenging with far more intelligent AI. And hey, some of them even mix up the formula by making you race 2 or 3 cars at once. What makes them so much more engaging to me than normal races, however, is that story and build-up. If you've done your sleuthing and read through the codex, constantly hearing about the enigmatic Cinderella past midnight as an example, and then having to drive over 2,000 kilometers just to finally see her. It's brilliant. Overall, I think that the campaign experience here is one of the best in virtually any modern racing game for the past few years. Though there are a few hiccups here and there that I did want to point out. First off, is that power is the name of the game here. If you want to be competitive, this is highway racing. So straight line speed is absolutely top of the list when you're making a build. And considering some of the bosses can be plumb difficult, this can really limit just how usable some of the car list is, as some cars just simply cannot become fast enough to be competitive without relying on cheese tactics to win. Aside from that, well, it can get very annoying to have to reset to the garage just because the rest of your roaming racers are on the opposite side of the highway. The option to build in more turnaround points where you could just pull a Yui would really help lessen the times you'd have to head back to the garage just for a simple directional change. But at the end of the day, apart from a few small things, this is a brilliant campaign and a healthy amount of playtime for early access. I am very excited to see how this concludes. Now I want to move on to something which on the surface level you'd think that TXR doesn't do all that differently from any other racers, and it's how your cars and the relationship with them is handled. Now granted, my experience with the series past is far from intimate, but of what I experienced in TXR 3, the cars were weird, down to the most fundamental level with the car list. It was filled with oddball gems such as the Isuzu Via-Cross, the Lancer EX GSR Turbo, and the Nissan Gloria as a few examples here. There was a huge fleet of Japanese legends that you're all more than familiar with, but then sprinkled in were those aforementioned oddballs, and even more, a selection of American or European vehicles to prevent the palette from being too one note. This is immediately where I noticed a pretty stark contrast with the modern game. As well, yes, I'm absolutely aware of the fact that the game is on early access, and more cars are sure to come over time. This is still a form of launch for the game, if the player count and price tag is taken into account. The car list is good, do not get me wrong, Name a Japanese car that you'd expect to find in a game like this, and yeah, it'll be here. But to go alongside that, I appreciate the introduction of more modern, less appreciated entries, such as the Suzuki Swift Sport or Alto Works, Mazda Tezas, and well, the current model Mazda 3. I think as a pretty safe basis on which to expand upon and eventually grow wackier or more diverse in its makeup of wheels over time, the list which makes up TXR in early 25 is exactly that. The list isn't huge. It isn't crazy, but it's more than enough to satisfy you and tide most people over until more brands are added in down the line. Please Genki, I need Honda in my life. Please add them in soon, please. Looking past the list, however, customization in racing games has evolved a healthy bit since the PS2 games, and while not direct competitors, there's going to be a lot of player overlap between those coming from, example, the Ghost era Need for Speed games. While I have many a qualm with those games, there isn't much denying the personalization that they can bring to the table, and I'm happy to report that while sure, absolutely not as in-depth as its Need for Speed rivals, you can get like 80% there with this game. Bumpers, side skits, wings, wheels, brake calipers, rotors, all of them can be swapped out from a short selection of typically about 3 kits per category. And while yes, I'm one who has more subdued tastes in the first place, I did not once catch myself wanting for more than what the game allows you to do. It's all down to the execution of its components. See, while yes, you may only have 3 different styles per part, none of them feel particularly gaudy or out of place. It all feels quite tasteful. Hell, there's even some really great options I can hardly name in any other racing game, such as the ability to choose how large of a brake caliper that you'd like to run, and where exactly on the rotor that you'd like to place it, front and back. I'd love for a future update to include tools to perfect the more minute details, such as individual exhaust pipes, head and taillights, and in general, just more subtle personalization details. But again, this is more of a want than a need. I'd love to be able to talk more about the vinyl editor, but, well, I'm about as adept creating liveries as a chipmunk is doing brain surgery. Though from what I've seen through your opponent's cars in-game, and through other people's builds online, safe to say this will more than suffice. Performance tuning is near on pretty damn perfect. This is not a game that I'd even want to see ludicrously unnecessary time and effort spent on the ability to create the most wacko, outlandish cars possible. Save that for Forza. What's given to you in TXR is one of my favorite upgrade systems in a modern racing game. You've got a healthy selection of components that you can improve in stages, unlocking further levels through gameplay progression, so that you have to work for a proper upgrade path, without having to do so for each individual car. Looking at you, Motorsport. The performance mods that you apply are also tunable, but the tuning menu isn't unnecessarily content dense. This isn't Gran Turismo or Assetto Corsa. It's a highway street racing brawler. Having more linear scope for tuning allows for minimal input and maximum result, as you only really have to change one setting by 1 or 2 points to feel a pretty substantial effect in vehicle dynamics. It's fantastic. There's another benefit in regards to how TXR's vehicles are handled, because of this heavily locked-in theme that I've mentioned many times so far, and it's probably about the most important part of a game like this: the physics. This was something I was particularly looking forward to, as, to be honest, I was never 100% sold on TXR3's handling model, though I do think it suited the game well. This new game, however, oh yeah, this is what I'm talking about. I hope you like stability, because TXR's handling model does everything it can to heighten the tight-knit, often very close quarters driving style that you'll be doing on the highway. It does this by allowing you to make some very drastic moves without the opportunity for any rear end slip that'll send you flying backwards first. In fact, that's simply not possible at all in this game. No, seriously, at least in the build which I'm playing on, you cannot slip traction at all, even if you're launching from redline. I personally think that this is a good thing. Not every single racing game out there has to be this sideways drifting cowabunga dude type light them tires up type of experience. And because TXR doesn't even give you that possibility, Lord, these cars are dialed in. There's no assists in this game, because it simply has no need for them. That's how honed in this model is. Now, is it 100% perfect? No, nothing is. My largest critique being the fact that while the physics themselves are surprisingly fluid and dynamic, this camera does that zero justice. It's far too stiff and locked in on the rear end of your car. If this was zoomed just a bit further out, a good middle ground between this and the far chase cam, and then some independent movement was added in so it feels less like those videos of a GoPro locked into the back of someone's trunk, it would enhance the driving experience phenomenally. So once again, as I said in regards to the career and gameplay, for an early access game, of course it isn't perfect, and it has some room to grow. But the way the cars in TXR homogenize and mix with the rest of this game and its vision is perfect. And with that, I want to move on to some of my final thoughts on TXR. In conclusion, I can't help but just be impressed, not just at the game itself and all of its own merit, but of the message that this sends towards the racing game genre as a whole. No stupid live service, no vacious open world, no jack of all trades, master of none marketing, no shoving hundreds of cars in your face in promo material, but a simple, down-to-earth racer with one mission. Not only that, but a smaller team released an infinitely more polished product than every big-name racing entry in its early access period than those games did on their full official launch days. This is only the beginning. Sure, there's a few things that I think could be changed here and there, but at the end of the day, this is the first time in years, apart from Hot Wheels Unleashed 2, that I'm sitting here smiling about a new game in this genre. To the team at Genki, thank you so much for putting your trust in the TXR name. And for all of you watching this right now, buy this game. Support this project, as supporting games like this shows the rest of the industry what we want to believe in. Tokyo Xtreme Racer is exactly what racing games need right now.